The war between the Sudanese Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces has raged since April 2023. It's turned the Sudan into the site of one of the world's most catastrophic humanitarian and displacement crises. We are told over 150,000 people have been killed, which is more than the Ukraine and Gaza combined. We had a conversation earlier due to time differences with Professor John Mukum Mbaku of the Brady Presidential Distinguished Professor of Economics at Weber State University in Utah in the United States. What, in your view, would be a sort of introductory summary to this conflict?
Well, I think one thing that we have to keep in mind is that the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, were actually a group that came together with the help of the government of Sudan. When when the government of Sudan in Khartoum was fighting in Darfur, it brought together this group, which was made up of several militias, primarily, as they say in Sudan, Arab-oriented militias, individuals who consider themselves descendants of Arabs. And these militias were brought together by the government in Khartoum to help them fight what they considered was insurgents in Darfur. And over the years, these groups started demanding for more and more positions in the central government in Khartoum. And eventually, as time went on, they became so arrogant and so important that they themselves began to they started seeing themselves as individuals who were capable of ruling all of Sudan. And I think that's where the conflict eventually ended up, because many of them wanted the Sudanese government to integrate them into the National Armed Forces and consider them as individuals who were capable of functioning as governors in Sudan, even though they were not elected by anybody to govern the country. And so this struggle between the Sudanese Armed Forces and this group comes primarily from the fact that, as we have said before, if you are a government in Africa and you start relying on ethnic militias to help you govern the country, you must understand that somewhere down the line, those military groups are going to eventually want to become legitimate governors within the country. And I think this is what is going on in Sudan at the moment.
When you say ethnic militias, can you break that down for us?
Well, the RSF is made up primarily of several groups. I think many people consider the Janjaweed, the guys who claim to be militias associated with nomadic groups that are primarily cattle rearers in Darfur, and who for many years have had problems with other ethnic groups in Darfur over access to land, mostly grazing land. And this has been going on for a very long time, even dating back to the time Sudan was a colony of Egypt and Great Britain. So this process of the struggle between these nomadic groups that are primarily owners of cattle and other groups that are farmers for access to grazing lands has been going on for a very long time. But in addition to that, there is also an ethnic and racial angle in that some of the groups consider themselves superior because they claim to be descendants of Arabs who came from the Middle East and Egypt and settled in the area over the years. So the racial aspect is very, very significant, primarily because as international organizations have determined, most of the operation by these militias is against African ethnic groups in Darfur. So the RSF is made up of a collection of several groups, although some groups, like the Janjaweed, are said to be dominant in the RSF.
Are you able then to sort of describe for us the involvement in the main of the surrounding countries in the conflict, including the United Arab Emirates? What are the articulation of these countries in the conflict? It seems that they have more or less been associated with different sides. And what are the motivations for which side they support?
Well, as far as we know, countries like Egypt have historical interest in Sudan.
Yeah.
You would understand that Sudan at one time, before it gained independence, was actually ruled by Egypt and Great Britain. And so the Egyptians have gotten involved in the conflict on the side of the Sudanese Armed Forces. The United Arab Emirates have also become involved, although if you look at the history of it, at one time, the Emirates, the UAE, was actually involved in helping Sudan, that is the Sudanese government, try to rehabilitate itself so that they could become recognized by the international community, since they had been designated by the US government as a country supporting terrorism. And so one of the things that the UAE was trying to do was to help the government of Sudan rehabilitate itself and become part of the international community, which of course happened to Sudan after the Abraham Accords that were negotiated by the present US president during his first term in office. And Sudan was eventually taken off the list of countries that were considered sponsors of terrorism. But at the moment, we understand that the United Arab Emirates is alleged to support the paramilitary rapid support forces, not the government of Sudan. So what has happened is that international international actors like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and several other countries in the region are involved in Sudan, but on opposite sides. Some of them are supporting the central government, the Sudanese Armed Forces, and others are supporting the rapid support forces. And that approach is creating a lot of problems for Sudan, because it is not possible for a ceasefire to be achieved very successfully if these international actors are interfering into the process. And of course, they are doing so not because they necessarily want what is good for the Sudanese people. They are doing so because they have their own interests in the region. For example, in the country. For example, the UAE is interested in trade in Sudan. It has been interested in trade in Sudan and not just Sudan, but Sudan and the area, the Horn of Africa, North Africa. They've been interested in trade for quite a while. And they also want to expand their geopolitical influence. And one way to do so is to have a leg in that part of the world. And of course, the Russian Federation is also interested because it has been struggling to build a military base in the north of Sudan, and in an effort to expand its influence into North Africa and then eventually into West Africa. So what is happening in Sudan right now is that all these international actors are coming into Sudan, not necessarily with the intention of helping maximize interests that are critical to the Sudanese people, but interests that are important to them. And that is one of the reasons why, if you talk to people who are working on this, on Sudan, they'll tell you that the best way to resolve this problem is for the African Union to lead the effort to resolve this problem and not for external actors to do so. And that even though external actors are important, for example, in providing moral support, in providing financial support for the reconstruction of a country that has been devastated, for supporting, for providing humanitarian aid, which is badly needed, the actual solution of the problem lies in African hands. And I believe that Africans have the capability to do so. The question is, do they have the willpower? Do they have the courage to step forward and help Sudan resolve this problem peacefully?
Please break down the different trade interests. What precisely are the resources that these different countries have an interest in the Sudan, and how are these trade networks sustained in the middle of a conflict?
Well, take Egypt, for example. Egypt is interested in the waters of the Nile. For Egypt, that's a very important interest. Egypt has been fighting Ethiopia for quite a while to make sure that water continues to flow from the Blue Nile into Khartoum, into Sudan, and then into Egypt. So from that point of view, one of the most important natural resources for the Egyptians is water, which is very critical for development in Egypt, especially given the fact that the president of Egypt, El-Sisi, is engaging in additional construction projects out there in the desert and will require a lot of water to take care of those projects. Countries in the Middle East, like United Arab Emirates, are interested in other natural resources. For example, gold. Gold is a very important export for Sudan, and of course there is oil that goes from South Sudan through Sudan into the Middle East and into other parts of the world. So there are other natural resources that Sudan has that a lot of countries want to tap into, and of course Sudan is from the point of view of religion, Sudan is a very important transit route for Muslims that are coming from West Africa who are going to Mecca, either by air or by land or by other routes. Sudan is very critical for that purpose. So countries like Saudi Arabia are also cognizant of that aspect of the importance of Sudan. And of course, you know that Sudan is very important for trade, for the Red Sea and the Suez Canal when it comes to international trade, because a lot of trade goes through Sudan and into international routes. So trade from East Africa, from West Africa and other places like that. So international trade is a very important, so peace in Sudan is very important for international trade. Peace in Sudan is very important for the Suez Canal. And of course, peace in Sudan is critical for the Nile, which is a very important waterway for that part of the world.
Professor, what would how would you describe the efforts of African bodies like the African Union and the multiple regional bodies in relation to trying to bring about peace and stability in the Sudan? Why have these efforts been met with a dead end, including interventions like elder statesmen such as Mbeki, Faki, and Obasanjo?
Well, the thing is that the African Union has some contradictions in the way it operates. For many years, when the African Union was still called the Organization of African Unity, there was this idea that the organization would not interfere with internal conflicts. It would not go into any country because there was this idea that the integrity, the sovereignty of each country should be maintained, and that the Organization of African Unity should not intervene in any country that is at civil war. And that was one of the reasons why the Organization of African Unity did not intervene in the Nigerian Civil War during the time Nigeria and Biafra were fighting. And so this hesitation has continued, even though the new African Union now has the authority to intervene when it is determined that there is certain crimes are being committed within a country. The problem has to do with the fact that many people interpret the constitutive act of the African Union in different ways. That is the act that provides the African Union with the authority to go in and intervene and try to provide a situation in which the human rights of individuals, especially women and girls who are being slaughtered and raped and sexually assaulted in Sudan, to provide, say, a mandate, perhaps with the United Nations, that would allow a group to go in and try to make sure that those people are not being continuously abused. But the African Union has hesitated and has not been willing or has not been able to do anything about that. So many observers are saying that the African Union is literally completely absent. And so nothing has been done, just as the atrocities continue to be committed by both sides in this conflict. And as international organizations have discovered, more than 150,000 people have been killed, 40 million literally thrown out of their homes, some of them internally displaced, and some have ended up in other countries. And I think that it is time for the African Union to rise up and do what he has claimed it was going to do. And this idea of African solutions to African problems should be put into place. And if the African Union needs assistance from the international community, it should ask the United Nations to help them. And they should go into Sudan and try to provide humanitarian assistance to the people, try to get a peace agreement together. I don't really understand why they cannot put together an emergency meeting and try to make sure that the two sides that are fighting stop fighting, and they can work on getting together an actual peace deal that will allow the country to move forward. There are people in Africa that are very capable, and you've mentioned some of them. The former president of South Africa, Mr. Mbeki, the former president of Nigeria, Mr. Obasanjo, the former head of the African Union, and several other individuals that have the capability, if the African Union is willing to go in there and provide assistance to a group of individuals that will be able to come up with the necessary arrangements to bring this war to an end.
But what would in the immediate, what would a peace process for the Sudan look like? Is it an integration of the fighting forces into a single unit, or it is a complete taking side against what may be considered an illegitimate force of rebels? What would such a peace look like?
I think the first thing that the AU, the African Union, should do is to deploy a mission to Sudan with a mandate to protect civilians, monitor human rights, especially the rights of women and girls, and assist in the return of all displaced persons. And the second thing they need to do is to have an expert group that will go in there and investigate the human rights violations. There has to be some form of accountability on both groups, the RSF and the Sudanese Armed Forces. And the third thing that the African Union needs to do is to work with regional groups like the East African Community, the Arab League, IGAD, and most likely the United Nations, to put together a single idea for peace in Sudan. And the reason I'm saying this is because we don't want countries going to Sudan trying to help and ending up exacerbating the problem. Because if you allow countries from the Middle East, Egypt, and all these other countries that are coming in, even including Chad, that are coming into Sudan, many of them have their own individual objectives. That is why we need a coordinated effort so that we have a single objective, and that objective must be in line with the ambitions of the Sudanese people to re-establish a civilian democratic government. That must be the aim. And so the African Union should work with all these external groups, including the European Union, and these external groups will be available to provide the financial assistance needed, and working with non-governmental organizations in Sudan. The African Union should be able to come up with a process of having producing a peace accord for the people of Sudan. Now, the question you are asking is, what would then happen to the soldiers in the RSF and the Sudanese Armed Forces? I think that is an issue that could be resolved through some kind of truth and reconciliation council, in order to allow for there to be accountability. We simply cannot sign a peace agreement and allow those people who have been engaged in these atrocities to simply go free. There has to be some kind of accountability. And so through that process of accountability, the people involved in these negotiations can then determine what would happen to the people who were engaged in these activities in this fighting, whether they will be integrated into what will become a new Sudanese Armed Forces or not. But that will be done through a legal process that will allow for some form of accountability to take place. Those people engaged in human rights violations must be held accountable. Those people who were engaged in the destruction of Khartoum and other areas and in the killing of people must be brought to justice. There must be some form of accountability. We simply cannot be talking in terms of going into Sudan and signing a peace agreement and stopping the conflict without letting people be brought to justice as a result of this civil war.
Professor John Mukum Mbaku, thanks deeply for creating time to speak to us here on Power Talk.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.